we are living in a moment that's defined not just by pressure, but by this incredible entanglement. I mean, you just have to look at the news.
Oh, absolutely.
It's this terrifying cocktail of geopolitical fragmentation and, accelerating climate change, massive economic instability.
And the technological disruption is just, it changes the rules every 6 months, it feels like.
It does. And the sources we're looking at today, they call this global state of affairs the planetary polycrisis. It's a great term for it. It's not one problem.
No, it's a cluster of crises that are all reinforcing each other. A cascade.
Exactly. And, alongside that systemic breakdown, there's another institution that's under profound pressure.
The university.
The university. They're being attacked, challenged, criticized for being too slow, too expensive, and frankly, for reinforcing the very societal inequalities they were supposed to help dismantle.
Which brings us to the core question, I think. As the systems all around us seem to be accelerating toward breakdown, what is the purpose of higher education now? What is it for?
That is the essential starting point for this deep dive. And our source material, specifically these excerpts from Otto Scharmer's work on innovation ecologies, it argues that the old mission, education for employment, is critically, maybe even dangerously outdated.
It really is. I mean, historically, universities were vital. They were engines for social mobility, for the creation of objective knowledge. But if you accept that the global crises are a reflection of industrial age thinking,
then just refining the system that produced that thinking it's futile, isn't it?
It's completely futile. So Scharmer's thesis is that universities have to execute a really radical shift. They have to evolve from being 20th century skill builders to becoming, and this is the key phrase, innovation ecologies for human and planetary flourishing.
Innovation ecologies for flourishing. That sounds like that's a dramatic change in mandate. It sounds like it requires a completely new operating system. What does that mission require of, students and faculty on the ground?
It means they have to become centers that foster the praxis. And that's the integrated practical application of regenerating soil, self, and society.
And not just theory.
Not at all. It's about engaging in the doing of renewal. If our leaders and graduates are only taught how to manage the existing system, then they are just going to perpetuate the polycrisis. To truly break that cycle, learning has to be grounded in the hands-on creation of regenerative futures.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this transition from passive knowledge acquisition to active systemic regeneration, it hits directly at a very real, very modern phenomenon.
The crisis of agency.
The crisis of agency. You, the listener, you probably feel this every single day. We know it needs to be done, but we feel totally paralyzed.
And that paradox is captured perfectly in the 2024 UNDP Human Development Report. It's a staggering finding. It found that 2/3 of people worldwide, they express a willingness to sacrifice personal income to address climate change.
So the moral will is there. They're willing to act, to pay the price, to shift their behavior.
The will is there. But, and this is the devastating counterpoint, the same proportion, 2/3 of people reported feeling a complete loss of agency.
They believe that any personal action they take will just have zero real impact.
Zero. They feel like they're willing to run, but they're on a treadmill that's just going nowhere.
That is the knowing-doing gap in painful clarity, and it feels like the existential challenge for modern leadership education. We have the knowledge, we have the moral willingness, but we feel utterly powerless to execute meaningful change that actually scales.
Which is why our mission in this deep dive is to really explore the leadership toolkit that's required to bridge that chasm, to overcome this perceived powerlessness by detailing exactly how education itself has to change.
And to enable that bridge, the source proposes we need to move beyond just, simple reflection on the past. We have to cultivate what it calls transformation literacy. How do we even define that?
Well, traditional educational structures, they equip us to reflect on the past, right? To analyze data, learn history, study established facts. But transformation literacy is the necessary upgrade. It's the capacity to learn by sensing and actualizing the future as it emerges.
Sensing and actualizing the future. That idea is given a very specific name in this research, isn't it?
It is. It's defined as presencing. And presencing is really the ability to shift the inner place from which we operate, to move from just reacting to the past or to our ego, to actually connecting with an emerging future possibility.
So without fundamentally upgrading our learning and leadership to master this, all the other ideas about structural reform in the university, new majors, new funding models, They're just window dressing.
They'll remain abstract and ineffective. You'll just get more sophisticated versions of the exact same status quo.
Okay, so to understand this radical shift that's required for the 21st century, it's probably useful to start with a bit of history. We need to quickly track the evolution of the university idea itself, because the source breaks this down beautifully, and it shows this clear, multi-century trend toward, well, greater complexity and integration.
It's a fascinating story. It really tracks a 1,000-year process of opening. It starts with these highly contained institutions, completely separate from the world.
The ivory tower.
The literal ivory tower. And it moves toward institutions that have to be deeply regeneratively embedded in society.
So let's start way, way back. We have the medieval model. What was the core purpose here? What did that look like for a student back then?
The core idea was actually pretty simple. Integrating teaching and doctrinal preservation. The infrastructure was basic and entirely internal. It was mainly lectures focused on transmitting established religious or philosophical texts.
And the type of knowledge.
Strictly objective or third-person knowing. So facts, rules, and doctrines that were external and verifiable by some authority. This was knowledge that was completely separated from the subjective experience of the person learning it.
Okay, so that changes radically with the Humboldt-Patient model in the 19th century. The German university ideal. This was the first major step toward integration, right?
It was revolutionary, genuinely revolutionary, because it integrated three things: teaching, research, and self-cultivation, or Bildung.
Bildung.
Bildung. This was a move to create not just a worker, but a whole person. And so the infrastructure grew. They added seminars, which allowed for more dialogue and critical exchange.
And crucially, it brought in a new kind of knowledge.
Yes, subjective knowledge, or first-person knowing. It was the first time the system recognized that the individual scholar's internal development, their self-reflection, their personal capacity for discovery, that was central to creating new knowledge.
Okay, and then we fast forward to the modern 20th century model, which is the one most of us are probably familiar with. This model really aligned higher education firmly with the industrial and the technological economy.
Absolutely. The focus here was integrating teaching, research, and skill building. Essentially training the workforce for the complex, specialized demands of the modern era.
And we saw a massive expansion of infrastructure.
Huge. Lectures, seminars, but now you have labs, practice fields, and these large siloed departments. This model introduced the third knowledge type: intersubjective knowledge, or second-person knowing.
So knowing that comes from collaboration.
Exactly. It's the acknowledgement that knowledge isn't just personal or objective, but it's created through collaboration, social interaction, shared narratives, team research.
Okay, so we've moved from objective fact to personal experience to social interaction as legitimate sources of knowledge. That brings us to today and to the proposed 21st century vision, the innovation ecology. What does this final, most integrated stage demand of us?
It demands the integration of learning, research, and the praxis of regenerating soil, self, and society. This is the moment the university realizes its mandate has to be planetary in scope. It's not just about knowing with your head or feeling with your heart or even collaborating interpersonally.
It's about doing the regenerative work with your hands in the real world.
That's it, the hand component. And that component requires completely new infrastructure. We can't just rely on lectures and labs anymore, can we?
No, it seems not.
The infrastructure has to shift to support deep, embodied change. This requires seminars, yes, but also intensely practical workshops, dedicated practice fields for leadership, deep immersion journeys into communities that are facing disruption, and permanent action learning hubs.
So the 21st century university has to cultivate self-awareness and creativity by grounding all of its research and teaching in these complex real-world cross-sector challenges.
It's the only way.
I have to pause here because this isn't just some interesting academic theory. This is being driven by a crisis of competence, which the source notes from a first-hand action research perspective at places like MIT. There's pervasive global institutional and leadership failure.
That failure is the void that universities must now fill. The observation is that leaders across all sectors, in government, in business, and nonprofits, they simply lack the toolkits and the practices that are necessary for achieving complex cross-sector systems change.
They have fantastic technical knowledge, that third-person knowing.
Oh, brilliant technical knowledge, and often high personal intelligence, that first-person knowing. But they fail spectacularly when it comes to collaboration and navigating true novelty.
It's like they're equipped with 20th century toolkits designed for siloed, hierarchical, predictable problems. But they're facing these 21st century interconnected, unpredictable polycrises. They are using a screwdriver when they need a complex satellite dish.
That's a perfect analogy. And so universities have a moral, and I would argue an economic imperative to fill this void. If they continue to educate leaders for the world that is collapsing, they become complicit in that collapse.
They have to fundamentally rethink leadership education to prioritize systemic transformation and the skills of sensing and acting from the future, not just reacting to the past.
That's the mandate.
This takes us directly to the training guide aspect of this deep dive. If the current educational model is actually reinforcing failure, we need to know exactly what mindsets are holding us back.
Right. And the source provides a fantastic framework for this. It uses three polarities, three sets of capacities that are fundamentally unbalanced in traditional education, especially in management, engineering, and business schools.
And the argument is that these models massively overrate three things and dangerously underrate three others.
Exactly. True transformative leadership requires mastering the dynamic balance between all six of these capacities.
Okay, so let's start with polarity one, knowledge versus not knowing. This is the challenge of humility. We are obsessed with knowledge. So why does the source argue that knowledge is actually overrated right now?
It's a bit of a provocative claim, but it's not an argument against being well-informed. It's more a pragmatic assessment of what's actually useful when you're facing novelty.
Okay.
Traditional education, especially in these highly competitive, very expensive programs, it focuses on accumulating and displaying established knowledge. But in a polycrisis, where the problems are unprecedented, the answers from the past are often insufficient.
Or sometimes actively misleading.
Or actively misleading, yes. So much of what matters in deep leadership and decision-making today is currently unknown. We don't know the exact technological implications of quantum computing or the precise cascade effects of a 2°C warming world. We just don't.
So if we only rely on what we already know, we're constantly trying to fit this complex emerging future into the simplified known box of the past. And that just leads to reaction, not innovation.
Precisely. And if we overrate knowledge, we naturally start to dismiss what we don't know. It creates a kind of intellectual arrogance. If you enter a situation believing you already possess the solution based on your past training, you are incapable of deep listening or sensing the emerging reality. You're closed off.
Which brings us to the underrated capacity in this polarity, not knowing. This requires a very specific kind of cultivated humility, doesn't it?
It does. It's the capacity to embrace uncertainty, to pause that inner voice of judgment, to listen without bias, to sense, and to co-sense from a deeper, more open place.
And this is where true creativity comes from.
It's the root of all deep creativity. Think about great entrepreneurs. They rarely start with a complete known business plan. They start with an open question, an unresolved tension, and a willingness to step into the void of not knowing to find an emergent solution. That openness is everything.
And this capacity, this comfort with not knowing, is our primary defense against being automated by technology.
Absolutely.
If AI excels at recombining existing knowledge, processing every single piece of digitized data on the planet, then the human edge, the ultimate primary capacity for learning and leadership, becomes the ability to tune in to what is not yet known.
Or not yet knowable through historical data. That is our transformative literacy. It's recognizing that the future that is emerging requires us to connect to a different source of insight than the past that is digitized. If universities don't cultivate the discipline of not knowing through practices like deep reflection and dialogue, they're essentially training their graduates to become second-class robots.
Okay, let's pivot to polarity two. Comfort versus discomfort. This is the challenge of equanimity. If we're talking about changing centuries-old systems, that's going to be uncomfortable.
It is inherently uncomfortable. And traditional learning, particularly in expensive, customer-focused higher education, it tends to overrate comfort. We create these academic and institutional environments where students and leaders feel safe and validated and unchallenged in their core beliefs or their methodologies.
We teach complex concepts without requiring the necessary emotional or, dare I say, existential engagement.
Exactly. The moment a leader begins to seriously question the extractive economic model that built their entire company, they are going to experience deep professional and cognitive discomfort. If their education has only trained them for comfort, they will immediately shut down that line of inquiry.
And that's the organizational death spiral of comfort, isn't it?
It is. Learning that leads to meaningful behavioral change, the kind you need to shift a whole system, requires leaders to actively lean into discomfort.
Why? Why is that so essential?
Because to diagnose the polycrisis accurately, leaders have to engage in sensing activities that are not biased by their personal comfort zones.
Could you give us a concrete example of that? Of an organizational failure caused by staying in the comfort zone?
Sure. Think about a global corporation that's facing resource scarcity. If the executive team only relies on their internal reports and data filtered through comfortable, familiar internal metrics, they will miss the signals of breakdown emerging from the very edge of their supply chain.
They won't see the community protests or the rapid ecological collapse that's happening in some remote sourcing location.
Exactly. Their comfort zone, the air-conditioned boardroom, the familiar spreadsheets, it literally prevents them from seeing the brutal truth of the system's brokenness.
So the ability to embrace discomfort is actually a prerequisite for systemic honesty. It requires the leader to leave the familiar campus or the office and engage in empathy and listening in places where the system is failing its people and the planet. That is a highly underrated capacity.
It's critical. If you prioritize comfort, you perpetuate the patterns of the past. Equanimity isn't about ignoring discomfort. It's about having the inner stability to observe highly disturbing realities without reacting in fear or judgment. You have to let the difficult truth guide the response.
Okay, finally, polarity 3. Action versus non-action. This is the challenge of stillness. The prevailing paradigm, especially in Western business and engineering, overwhelmingly overrates action. We associate action with productivity, with momentum, with success.
And that leads directly to the trap of mindless action. The instant a challenge arises, a new regulation, a market disruption, a crisis, the organizational instinct is to jump straight to action.
It's almost always a reaction, not a considered response.
Almost always. When we jump from challenge to action without pausing, we usually just default to doing more of the same or applying pre-programmed patterns from the past, and that often just exacerbates the original problem through brute force. We mistake activity for efficacy.
We've all seen the manager who schedules an emergency meeting not to think, but just to prove they are doing something.
We have. And the source highlights that this hyperaction orientation leads either to analysis paralysis, too much thinking and no action, or mindless action, where we use a chainsaw to solve a problem that required a scalpel. Both are failures of presence.
So the underrated capacity, non-action, or stillness and contemplation, it sounds so counterintuitive in a crisis, but you're saying it's absolutely critical.
In these hyper-expensive higher education environments where every single minute is monetized for some learning outcome, there is minimal space reserved for reflection or contemplation or inner stillness.
There's no time for it.
There's no time for it. And yet stillness is the primary gateway to all deep creativity. It allows the leader to step back from the frenzy of reaction and to sense the emerging field, to access that capacity for presencing before they commit resources or define the next step. Stillness is generative. Mindless action is destructive.
This really is a training guide for a new type of leader. The synthesis here is so clear. It's not about abandoning knowledge or comfort or action, but about achieving literacy in all 6 capacities.
The goal is the dynamic balance. Balancing knowledge with not knowing, which is humility, balancing comfort with discomfort, which is equanimity, and balancing action with stillness or letting go.
And if you, the listener, feel overwhelmed by the polycrisis, it's likely because your existing toolkit, the one you were trained in, overrates the first 3 capacities.
And the future of effective leadership and learning depends entirely on our collective ability to rebalance those polarities. It's a necessary operating system update for human leadership in the 21st century.
Let's turn back to the technological challenge for a moment, because the rise of these powerful generative AI models makes this human update, this mastery of the polarities, even more urgent. Where is the intrinsic human edge when a machine can process billions of data points in a matter of seconds?
We have to focus our educational efforts on AI's fundamental blind spot, and that blind spot is the future.
The future.
Specifically, the part of the future that cannot be reduced to just modifying relational probabilities of the past. AI is brilliant at optimizing the past, recombining existing knowledge, refining existing patterns, but it fundamentally lacks the innate human capacity for deep creativity and self-transcending action.
So it can't generate something genuinely new that originates from human agency and potential because it's still just operating on the database of what has been.
It can't. It cannot sense the possibility that is currently dormant or that's emerging from the edge of the system. That generative capacity requires agency from the heart, not just the head, and skills like deep listening and generative dialogue, which are uniquely human.
This echoes that fantastic quote from Andreas Schleicher, the OECD's Director for Education Skills. He said, "If we want to stay ahead, We have to find and refine the qualities that are unique to our humanity. Schools need to develop first-class humans, not second-class robots.
That perfectly frames the regenerative mission, doesn't it? The future of learning, therefore, must cultivate practices like generative listening and deep sensing and rapid cycle prototyping skills that allow us to tune into and operate from the future as it emerges, bypassing that reliance on historical data that restricts AI.
So this requires transforming the university into that breathing innovation ecology we talked about. Let's detail the three major structural shifts that are necessary to update the university's DNA.
These three shifts are all about moving the point of learning.
Okay, shift one, the outer place. We need to move learning from the isolated classroom, from the ivory tower, to the real world.
This means embedding learning in mandatory sustained immersion journeys and participatory action learning that take students directly to the front lines of societal innovation and disruption.
We have to close the gap between the university and the community.
We have to. The medieval university was separate from society. The 21st century one must be profoundly intertwined with it, with learning emerging from the friction of real-world problems.
Okay, shift two, the inner place. This is moving learning from the intellectual head to the heart and the hand.
Yes. We need to move beyond purely intellectual exercises, the debates and academic analysis, and to engage in the praxis of regeneration. This means cultivating the self-awareness, the heart, that's necessary to lead from a place of authenticity.
And the embodied skills of the hand.
And the embodied skills of the hand, the skills of rapid prototyping, building regenerative business models, or designing local solutions. It's not enough to understand systems theory. You must build and embody the regenerative action.
And finally, shift three, the interpersonal space. This addresses the quality of how we relate to each other by practicing deep listening and generative dialogue.
Right. When leaders talk together, they so often remain stuck in defensive or transactional or just polite conversation that reinforces the status quo. Generative dialogue is a social technology that shifts how we converse, how we think, and how we act together. It cultivates the relational quality that's necessary for complex collaboration across the silos that define the polycrisis.
So those three shifts, place, inner source, and relational quality, are absolutely mandatory.
They are.
The source uses a really powerful analogy to describe the core process of this living ecology, breathing. It suggests the university has to operate in this dynamic cycle of immersion and reflection. So how does the system breathe in?
The inhale is the opening process. Learners take these deep dive journeys to the front lines, the places of maximum disruption or maximum potential. They move into the community, they listen, they sense deeply, and they support action learning initiatives directly where the change needs to happen.
This is the moment they have to engage with discomfort and not knowing.
Exactly. They soak up the unvarnished reality of the system.
And then they have to breathe out.
Yes. They return to campus from that deep immersion. The campus then functions as the high-quality supporting infrastructure where they make collective sense of their complex, often conflicting experiences. They do this alongside fellow learners, faculty, and these pioneering external partners.
So they process the emotional and the cognitive load in a safe, reflective space.
The holding space.
So the campus becomes the reflective incubator, and the community is the learning laboratory. This breathing cycle transforms the entire university ecology into a living lab of emerging futures.
Which is something worthy of the massive investment of time and resources we expect from learners today.
This shift feels essential, but we know the scale of the crisis facing education is just enormous. We see reports of major drops in student enrollment globally. And the source highlights this disturbing data on high school absentee rates. In some OECD countries, 30% or more of registered students are functionally disconnected.
Which just shows that the old modes are completely failing to connect with people's lives.
Right, and those numbers confirm that the university cannot possibly implement this regenerative vision alone. To succeed, they have to invest in an essential, yet often missing, structural element.
Social middleware.
Middleware.
Yeah.
That's a term you usually hear in software for connecting systems. How does it apply to social systems in higher education?
It refers to the crucial enabling institutions, the processes, and the networks that act as structural bridges between academia theory and research and society practice and need. It is the institutional capacity that is dedicated to closing that knowing-doing gap.
So if a university only has great faculty and smart students, but no mechanism to connect them meaningfully and deeply with external partners, the learning just stays trapped inside the ivory tower.
It stays trapped. So what are the two core dimensions of this social middleware? What does it look like in practice?
First, the quality of the ecosystem.
Right. This is the depth, the diversity, and the long-term commitment to partners that can offer meaningful action learning opportunities. This requires dedicated staff whose entire job it is to cultivate and maintain these relationships, not just on a semester-by-semester basis, but across years, building real trust.
Okay, and the second dimension.
The quality of holding spaces and practices. This is the investment in state-of-the-art social technologies, reflective practices, systems sensing methodologies, generative listening, and dialogues. These are the spaces that transform learning relationships from being merely transactional,
Like doing a quick project for a company.
right, to being deeply transformative, like co-creating a new solution with a community.
In most universities, I would argue these two elements, a dedicated ecosystem builder and these intentional holding spaces, they're almost non-existent. Or they're relegated to underfunded volunteer initiatives.
Precisely. They're not viewed as core infrastructure, and that's why the system fails to scale transformation. The implementation of this entire regenerative model depends on strategically cultivating this middleware.
Okay, let's look at the impact of this middleware through the lens of student agency. The source breaks down action learning into 3 distinct levels, and each one corresponds to an increasing depth of transformation.
Right. So you start at level 1, structured exposure. Here, students have only partial agency. These are predefined, carefully curated experiences. Think of a short-term internship or a business case study that's conducted on site.
The students get to experience new environments, maybe working with a company on a problem, but they don't actively shape the parameters of the challenge or the environment itself.
Exactly. The learning is limited to predefined experiences and observation. The level 1 student is basically observing the system from a safe distance.
Okay, then you move up to level 2, immersive learning. Here, students get expanded agency.
At this level, students take much greater ownership. They work in small, cross-disciplinary teams to solve real-world challenges, often spanning multiple months, with only minimal targeted faculty support. Think of the action learning labs at MIT Sloan.
So they're directly engaged with real-world complexity, with budget constraints, with conflicting stakeholder interests. They're actively solving problems within the existing system.
Yes. And the pinnacle, the regenerative goal, is level 3, transformative learning. This requires what's called regenerative agency. This is where the training guide truly begins to apply the principles of presencing.
So what does that look like?
This is systemic and regenerative learning. It integrates deep listening, generative dialogue, and system sensing into the action itself. The focus shifts from solving an existing problem to co-creating an entirely new system or possibility that regenerates the environment and the community.
So you're talking about things like specialized university labs, working alongside UNDP action learning labs, using practices like empathy walks and ULab practices to foster deep change.
It moves far beyond knowledge accumulation to embodied co-creation.
But level 3 is difficult. It's difficult because it requires cultivating the social soil, this invisible foundation of the university ecology. Tell us more about that distinction between soil and systems.
This is a critical insight from the social field model. So above the ground, we have the social systems. This is what is observable, tangible, and measurable.
The curriculum, the departments, the budget, the metrics, the technology, we're very good at changing social systems.
We are. We swap out a curriculum. We merge 2 departments. That's a system change. But level 3 transformative learning requires investing in what is below the ground, the social soil.
The roots.
The roots. This is the quality of awareness, the quality of attention, and the quality of the relationships that underpin all the systems. If the soil is toxic, if the relationships are characterized by fear or mistrust or cynicism, then no matter how good the system looks on paper, it will fail.
That puts the failure of the university system squarely on the quality of its relationships, not just its curriculum design.
So what does investing in the social soil actually look like for an institution?
It requires long-term strategic commitments. First, investing in ecosystems of partners, meaning cultivating robust long-term relationships of trust with external changemakers, not just engaging in one-off corporate projects for funding.
Second, strengthening the internal culture to prioritize reflection and deep dialogue among students and faculty. And third, and most importantly, cultivating intentional holding spaces and teaching leadership practices designed specifically to move conversations from transactional to generative. You have to invest in the roots if you want to change the fruit.
This necessary investment in the social soil brings us directly to the training guide elements for every learner and leader. These are the 7 specific practices that are necessary for shifting the quality of our thinking, our conversing, and our acting together. If we want to achieve level 3 regenerative agency, What are these core 7 social leadership practices?
These are the disciplines required to move from reaction to generative action. They create a collective shift in the social field. So, one is becoming aware.
Shifting attention from reacting to external events to observing your own internal listening patterns.
Exactly. Two is listening, moving beyond just confirming what you already know, what we call downloading, to genuinely listening for what is new and different.
Factual or empathetic listening.
Right. Three is co-sensing dialogue, engaging in deep inquiry, suspending judgment, and sensing the system's reality together, moving beyond transactional debate. Four is presencing.
That inner move of connecting to the deepest source of potential and possibility sensing and actualizing the future as it emerges.
And then building on that, five is co-imagining, jointly envisioning new futures, breaking free from the constraints of the past by prototyping radical possibilities. Six is co-creating.
The hand component. Rapid cycle prototyping of new solutions with partners in the field, taking the idea and making it real.
And finally, seven, co-governing or ecosystem governance, establishing the infrastructure and agreements you need to maintain that collaborative field and scale the change.
So mastery of these 7 practices is what enables level 3 action learning. It's how you move from theory to true transformation. But the source material pushes us even deeper, suggesting that to enable this regenerative model, we need to activate a missing dimension of knowing itself.
That's right. As we trace the history of the university, we saw the integration of first-person knowing subjective, my experience, second-person knowing intersubjective, what we create together in dialogue, and third-person knowing objective, measurable facts.
And I can see how the modern university successfully combines those 3. But transformation, the kind of transformation needed to prevent systemic collapse, requires the introduction of fourth-person knowing. Now, this sounds highly spiritual, difficult to measure, and certainly outside the remit of traditional STEM education. Why is it essential, and how does a public institution justify investing in cultivating it?
That is a crucial challenge, and the source grounds it in creativity, not spirituality. Fourth-person knowing is defined as a self-transcending awareness. It's experienced as creativity or insight coming through me rather than originating strictly of me.
Meaning it's not based on my ego or my training or my past conditioning.
Precisely. It is the moment of collective flow or deep innovation where the solution feels emergent and inevitable, not forced.
So it's the shift from working harder to accessing an insight that comes easier because you've tuned into the deeper potential of the system itself.
Exactly. When it's activated, this form of knowing shifts the quality of the entire social field. It's what allows individuals and communities to tap into the deepest sources of creativity and change necessary to tackle the polycrisis. A university justifies this investment because cultivating this capacity is the only path to generating novel, systemic solutions that AI cannot replicate and that past knowledge cannot provide.
If we only teach objective and subjective knowledge, we only ever produce incremental change.
Exactly.
But how does a state-funded university, built on lectures and standardized tests, physically facilitate this self-transcending awareness and fourth-person knowing? It seems like a huge leap.
This is where the social middleware and these new alliances become absolutely indispensable. Activating this capacity requires creating field conditions through deep immersion and generative practice. You have to link the innovative pockets within academia to external pioneers, the people who already operate in these generative social fields.
So the university must partner with organizations that are already practicing Level 3 action learning. Who are these potential middleware partners? Who can help transition theory into regenerative praxis?
They are mission-driven organizations that operate outside the conventional academic or corporate structure. The source highlights several key types. You have impact hubs that offer shared physical and generative spaces for collaboration. You have organizations like Imago Global Grassroots that specialize in scaling grassroots impact and working directly with communities.
And technical experts, too.
Technical experts like Cellco in regenerative energy and groups like the Sustainable Food Lab that are focused on regenerative agriculture systems.
I noticed the source also specifically mentions the Presencing Institute, which offers its U-School resources as Creative Commons globally.
And that's a perfect example of social middleware that scales the methodology itself on a global level. These external partners possess the on-the-ground experience and often the established social practices, the social soil, that faculty and students need to plug into to move beyond theory and activate that fourth-person knowing.
This suggests a massive ways of innovation is possible. I mean, Stanford's innovation ecosystem fueled Silicon Valley. MIT's sparked Route 128, which led to the AI and biotech revolutions. This source suggests that the next frontier for higher education isn't just technology.
It's a massive wave of societal regeneration, driven by these new alliances and the integration of all four types of knowing: objective, subjective, intersubjective, and self-transcending. It's the complete upgrade of the university's operating system. An institution finally aligned to address fundamental global challenges by leveraging the full spectrum of human capacity, focusing on the intertwined regeneration of soil, society, and self.
I find this comprehensive training guide fascinating, but I have to introduce a moment of skepticism here. How quickly can we realistically expect a 1,000-year-old institution, one that's bound by budgets and tenure and regulatory frameworks, to make this profound multidimensional shift?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? The institutional inertia is immense, I won't deny that. But the pressures of the polycrisis and the market reality of disengaged students are also immense. The shift won't happen top-down overnight.
It has to happen from the bottom up and the outside in.
It happens through committed pockets of pioneers within academia, forging those external alliances, and systematically investing in the social middleware, proving the model works at a micro level, and then scaling it.
Okay, so let's quickly summarize the core shift required for the 21st century university. What is the takeaway from this training guide?
The 21st century model moves beyond education for employment to become a breathing innovation ecology. It integrates learning, research, and the hands-on praxis of regenerating soil, self, and society. It fundamentally rebalances the leadership toolkit, moving from overrating knowledge, comfort, and action
To valuing the humility of not knowing, the equanimity of discomfort, and the deep creativity that's found in stillness. It's an institution that blends the head, the heart, and the hand.
And it operates in that dynamic cycle of immersion in the real world. The breathing in and high-quality reflection on campus, the breathing out. And critically, it supports this entire process through dedicated social middleware and the intentional cultivation of the social soil through those 7 social leadership practices.
And this final insight brings us full circle, doesn't it? Back to that foundational idea of humility and humanity, connecting it back to the core challenge of regeneration.
It does. It's a beautiful linguistic connection. The words humus, meaning the earth or the ground, humanity, and humility all share the same ancient Indo-European root, gum.
Cum, earth or ground. It suggests a linguistic connection between our very identity, our moral stance, and the literal soil beneath our feet.
It does. Humility, in this context, it's not about subservience. It's about reclaiming a deep connection to the ground of reality, the awareness that we are part of a larger ecological system. The highest purpose of higher education in this polycrisis era is to shift from an extractive model of knowledge taken for personal gain, to a regenerative model that cultivates the planet, people, and personal agency simultaneously.
And I think the ultimate provocative thought here for you is to apply this training guide to your own life and work. Look at the challenges in your organization, your community, or even in your family structure. If the social soil in that sphere of influence feels strained, if creativity feels blocked, or if you're just stuck in mindless action, the regenerative answer lies in those 7 practices. The challenge is simple. Identify which of those 7 social leadership practices, awareness, listening, dialogue, presencing, co-imagining, co-creating, or co-governing, is most needed right now to cultivate the social soil in your own sphere of influence, and then commit to practicing it.
Start with stillness and see what future emerges.